I refer to self care in most episodes, but what is self care? I heard that a lot when I was caring for Lance. And I really had to stop and think about what qualified as self care. And that was something that wasn't always easy because I've said many times before, I lived in a fog. It was hard to think beyond what I needed to get done in this moment, let alone stop and think, oh, what do I need to do to take care of myself? So Jenna's here to dig into this topic with me a little bit.
Well, hello. I love talking about this because I think it's so important and also, I would say, a little misrepresented in our culture. I think the reality of self care is a really important thing for people to acknowledge if they want to get through life and maintain their vibrance, maintain their personality, maintain their grace toward others, and just maintain their sanity some days. So I'm glad that we're discussing this because I think it will be helpful to a lot of people.
Self care is doing the things to take care of yourself that nourish you physically, spiritually, and emotionally. So, a good way to look at that is if you're doing something that you think might be self care and you're left not feeling so great when you're done, I wouldn't consider that self care. Some of the things that I recognized as self care were setting healthy boundaries, journaling, seeing a counselor, getting out and having coffee with a friend, going to the gym, being selective about who I spent my time with, people who fill you up, not people who leave you feeling depleted. Setting aside 15 minutes in the day somewhere or more if you can manage it so that you can just have some time for yourself to be quiet, to read, whatever it is that you need to do to refuel yourself. And just getting a change of scenery. Get outside of those four walls. It's not good to stay inside all the time.
I love this and I love those descriptions. The idea of self care was something I always struggled with because I watched a lot of people around me um, misuse the term, and I never developed a healthy idea of what self care was. I think you really taught me a lot about um, what genuine self care is. And it's not escaping from the things you need to do, it's not indulging in things that are ultimately not good for you. It's promoting your own well being in ways that future you will be thankful that you did. I struggled a lot with feeling guilty taking time for myself because I watched a lot of people taking advantage of the term and using it as an opportunity to be honestly quite selfish. So, in my space that I lived in, I became hesitant to use the term. And I think you really showed me how important genuine self care is, and that it's not something that, like you said, leaves me feeling worse in the end, leaves the challenging situation that I'm dealing with to still be dealt with. But it makes me stronger and more capable of dealing with the challenges that were going to come at me. And it makes me more vibrant, more a better version of me. So I love that we're talking about ways to promote and encourage genuine, healthy self care.
Yes, because like I said, when I first heard the term, I didn't really know what self care was. I had to kind of discover that for myself. And it is the number one question that I ask my friends who are caregivers or who are just going through a challenging time in general. What have you been doing to take care of yourself? And I want to know, I honestly want to know. Did you get out and go for a walk? Did you get some sunshine today? Did you spend time with a friend? Did you take some time for you so that you can recharge, so that you can be the best that you can be?
Absolutely. I can honestly say that I had an uncomfortable relationship with that term probably right up until I met you. You really changed my perspective and opinion on that. You came from a perspective of your life being so hard every single day, day in and day out. You helped me tremendously to understand not only the value of self care, but what it really is. And it really is genuinely making sure that you are stronger and more capable of dealing with the challenges of life and finishing well. One of the things that you taught me was the value of small things, that it doesn't have to be 5 hours of a spa day. It can be 5 minutes of quiet, a walk around the block, um, just listening to a piece of music that I really love. I don't know, small things that were maybe a 5 or 10 or 15 minute, but figuring out what those things are that really boosted my spirits and revived my soul and made me feel human again. Those things were super valuable. And I think you taught me about that. So that was something I learned from you pretty early on. Did you always know how valuable those little things were, or did it take you some time and some life to learn how to quantify self-care in something that wasn't this massive undertaking?
I'm a detail person by nature, so I've always paid attention to the small things. I don't think that when I really began focusing on self-care that I was really aware of the fact that I was paying attention to the small details. It wasn't until later that I realized I I've never really been much of a big picture person. I see the big picture, but I see all the little details that lead to that big picture. So the big picture for me, I guess, would be just feeling better and then just thinking about the little things that I can do to get me to that point. So when it came time for self care and in anything in life, I just naturally gravitate towards those little things because they make me happy. And now I see that those little things offer more rewards because you get instant rewards. They're smaller, but you get them more frequently than if you're sitting around waiting for the big thing.
That's an interesting way to put it, um, on something I hadn't thought about, that the little things do add up to the big things. I think it really brings home the point that it's important for us to be careful, like you said, and to pay attention to the things that really do make us feel better, because they are all going to add up to something. So if we're not careful about what we choose as self care, maybe it won't end up being self care in the end. So I think you made a really good point of paying attention to what does make us feel better and not discounting those little things. Like you said, taking 5 or 10 minutes just to yourself, just for some peace and quiet. It's very tempting in this day and age to fill a 10-minute break um, with a screen. And I think that one of the things that you taught me is put that aside and go out, be in nature for 10 minutes, get some sunshine for 10 minutes, walk around the block, feel some grass like under your toes. Just hear the birds singing, look at the clouds, all those things. Maybe it's rain that you're going to sit outside. Maybe it's the cold. Maybe it's the middle of winter. Go outside and look at the snow and how beautiful it is. There's all kinds of little things that if we just will take the 5 or 10 minutes to notice them really rejuvenate us. How did you figure that out?
I think, like I said, it's just the way that I've always been. I've always loved nature. I've always loved being active. I grew up not we didn't watch TV when I was a kid. We went years without even having a TV. I've got 6 siblings and we lived in a small house, and my parents would send us outside to play. And I remember thinking, I'm a bookworm. When I was a kid, I wanted to stay in my room and read my book all day, but my parents would make us go outside. And sometimes I would take my book outside and sit in the shade and read my book. But just getting outside and being in nature was so rejuvenating. That is something that makes you feel alive. And when you are stuck inside 4 walls all the time as a caregiver, I would feel those walls closing in on me. And Lance was the same. He also loved nature. We loved to travel, we loved adventure. And as our world became smaller, it was harder to get out and do all the things that we wanted. But even just putting him in the wheelchair and pushing him around the neighborhood, even though I was still taking care of him, that was self-care for both of us because he didn't have the opportunity to do that for himself. So that was one of the easiest things for me to do. I could just step outside on my back patio because I had nature right there. But then going to the gym too, that was something that for a while I felt like, I have to do this. But as soon as I worked out, I felt better. And then it made me want to work out again the next time. It was all those little things that added up. And I don't know that I ever really figured it out. I just was aware of myself, and I knew, even though I lived in a fog, I was aware enough that these were things that made me feel, even if it was just a little bit better, it was still better.
I love that. And I think for those times when you can't necessarily get outside for whatever reason, maybe it's just not feasible. Maybe you live, in a more urban environment where you can get outside, but maybe it's louder and smellier and dustier or whatever than being inside. And so maybe that's not as nourishing to your soul. But I think just even doing something like listening to a piece of music that you haven't listened to in a long time, reading some poetry or a chapter from your very favorite book. Maybe it's journaling. You've mentioned that so many times and how helpful that was to you. Just journaling for 5 or 10 minutes can be super helpful and just lift your spirits. It gets things out that need to come out. Maybe it's having a cup of your favorite tea. Maybe it's just doing some stretching or a couple of yoga poses in your living room that take 5 minutes. You don't have to do an hour of yoga. Maybe 5 minutes will be helpful. And quite frankly, I always feel better after just even that. So I think it's really being intentional. We've talked about that a lot, but also paying attention to what does make you feel better. So important. And I think one of the other things that is important to understand is that some things are going to fill your cup more on an emotional or psychological level, and some things will make you feel better on a physical level, just from a pure physiological standpoint. And understanding that there needs to be a balance of the two. You have to take care of your body and you have to take care of your emotional and psychological well-being. Were you always able to differentiate between those two and find a good balance, or was that something you had to learn?
For me, I think that they're very closely tied together and equally important. I was constantly assessing everything, the situation, whether it was myself or Lance, whatever we had going on in our life. I constantly assessed everything and wanted it to be as good as it could be so that we could live the best life possible. So that meant just being aware of myself and being aware of my surroundings, being aware of Lance, obviously. And that wasn't easy. because I was living in a fog. But there were some things that really made me recognize when something was off. One of those was burnout. When I would get snappy with Lance or with someone else, that was my sign that I needed some self care. And it usually meant talking to someone, getting in to see my counselor. Burnout was a big one for me. I was burned out most of the years that I cared for Lance. But when it got really bad is when I knew that I needed to get in and talk to my counselor or talk to a close friend. Sometimes I had a friend that was available that I could talk to for a little bit, and that helped a lot. And when I felt more fatigued than normal, because I was pretty fatigued for over a decade, or if I felt like I was getting weak, then I knew that I needed to prioritize physical like activity, getting to the gym. That was just an essential thing for me as a caregiver because Lance was so dependent on me. But when it came down to it, if I could only do one thing, if I only had time for one thing, I prioritized physical well being over the psychological aspect of it because, well, there were two reasons for that. Number one, I needed to be strong enough physically to take care of Lance. If I wasn't strong enough to take care of him, then everything just spiraled out of control. And number two, physical self care, exercise has a positive psychological effect. And so I would kill two birds with one stone.
I love that. I love that crossover that you were able to find between the two things. And I think that that's probably more helpful to more people than we even give it credit for. Um, I do know that I've encountered over the course of my life people that say, well, like, oh, I can't exercise because I don't have a gym membership. And I just want to encourage people that if that's what's holding you back, not having a gym membership, don't let it. Going for a walk outside is one of the most valuable things I think that you can do for your body and for your mind. And just get a just a decent pair of tennis shoes. They don't have to be expensive. They don't have to be anything over the top, but just a comfortable pair of tennis shoes and go for even a 10-minute walk. But if you can manage 20 minutes, that does absolute wonders for your mental health and your physical health.
Right. And one of the things that helps me with that, because I still live a pretty isolated life and I don't have a gym membership, but I love to work out. Sometimes it's hard to do those things because I'm alone. It's good to have an accountability partner. So, my best friend lives in Denver. She and I call each other, text each other regularly. Did you get outside today? Did you talk to any people? That's the one that she asks me because I don't talk to people very often. But just having an accountability partner is so helpful. It really does help you stay on track with those things that do help keep you healthy.
It's so funny. I think about the term self-care and it's so good to integrate that into your life. And I think one of the criteria that I have always used, and you brought this up, do you feel better at the end of it? Does it actually help you to face the challenges of life and be stronger for whatever ups and downs are ahead of you? And sometimes the thing that's better for you, that self-care, isn't the obvious answer. It's the going for a walk instead of sitting on the couch and scrolling through your phone. It's the having a nutritious meal as opposed to having donuts. It's the things that make you feel better in the end, and it's the things that future you will thank now you for having done. That's been my criteria as I've gotten older, is what will future me think about now me doing this?
Right. That's a good way to look at it too. I didn't have a lot of time when I was caring for Lance. We've talked about that often. And so I really had to be focused on those things that kept me healthy. But there were times when I did find a little bit of extra time and I would do one of those other things. Like you said, getting donuts. I love donuts. I only get donuts about maybe once every 2 or 3 years. Um, but to me, that's not self-care. That's a treat. And there's a difference between self-care and getting a treat.
Absolutely. That's a really good distinction. And those treats are important, but they have to be the exception and not the rule. It has to be, it has to actually be a treat. I think by definition is something that is not something you would normally do. So that's a good distinction between those two things. And like you said, sometimes the treat is the self-care, but it has to be a one-off, has to be the exception for it to, I think, really um, be useful in that capacity.
Right. Just the occasional thing, because true self-care is the things that nourish you physically, spiritually, and emotionally, like we said at the beginning. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation, Jenna. I really appreciate it, and I will see you next time.
All right, I'll see you next time. Thanks for having me. Bye.